Deep in the forests of eastern Poland, a man is doing the most routine job imaginable. Marek Zielinski is a forestry surveyor. His work involves soil samples, tree density reports, and ground-penetrating radar scans. It is April 2025, and on this particular morning, he is mapping a stretch of woodland so remote that the nearest paved road is 6 miles away. The radar pings something unusual. A void. A large one. Sitting roughly 12 feet beneath the forest floor. Marek assumes it's a collapsed root cellar, maybe an old well. This part of Poland is littered with remnants of the war. Crumbling foundations, rusted fencing, the occasional shell casing half swallowed by the earth. He almost logs it and moves on. Almost. But something about the size of the reading nags at him. So he starts clearing brush and debris with his hands. 20 minutes later, his fingers hit concrete. Not crumbled, not broken, but solid, reinforced concrete beneath decades of root growth and packed soil. He keeps digging. An hour later, he's staring at a hatch. A rusted iron door set into the ground, sealed shut by corrosion and time. When he finally forces it open, the air that rises from below is stale and cold, untouched. A set of narrow stairs descends into total darkness. What Marek doesn't know yet is that he has just stumbled onto one of the last undiscovered secrets of World War II, a hidden underground laboratory buried beneath this forest since 1944. And inside it, the remains of a man who was never supposed to be found. A German general who vanished 81 years ago. This is not just another wartime discovery. This is the story of a man who built something terrifying and then made sure no one would ever use it. To understand what Marek found beneath that forest floor, you have to go back to the man who built it. General Werner Krauss was not the kind of officer who appeared in propaganda films. He didn't give rousing speeches or pose for photographs with Hitler. He was an engineer first and a soldier second. Born in 1901 in Stuttgart, Krauss studied mechanical engineering at the Technical University before joining the military in the late 1920s. By the time war broke out, he had risen through the ranks not through political loyalty, but through sheer intellectual force. Colleagues described him as brilliant, methodical, and dangerously curious. He had an obsession with emerging weapons technology that bordered on compulsion. Ballistics, propulsion, guidance systems, aerodynamics. While other officers studied maps, Krauss studied physics. His service on the Eastern Front earned him the Knight's Cross and the respect of men who didn't hand it out easily. But by 1943, everything changed. Krauss was pulled from the front lines without explanation and reassigned to a classified research initiative operating under direct orders from Berlin. No public record of the transfer exists. His name was quietly removed from unit rosters. His family back in Stuttgart noticed the shift immediately. The letters home, which had always been warm and detailed, became short and cryptic. Then they stopped altogether. His wife Elsa later told relatives that when Werner visited briefly in late 1943, he was a different man, thin, distracted. He burned personal papers in the garden and told her something she never forgot. "If anything happens to me, don't look for answers. Some doors are better left closed." She thought it was the stress of war. She had no idea he was about to disappear forever. By early 1944, the Third Reich was dying, and everyone at the top knew it. The Eastern Front had become a meat grinder. Soviet forces were pushing west with a momentum that couldn't be stopped. Allied bombing campaigns were turning German cities into rubble. Factories that once churned out tanks and aircraft were reduced to twisted steel and ash. Supply lines were severed. Morale was collapsing. But Hitler refused to accept defeat. Instead, he doubled down on a fantasy. Wunderwaffe, miracle weapons. The idea that some revolutionary technology could turn the tide of the war overnight and snatch victory from the jaws of annihilation. It wasn't entirely delusional. Germany had produced genuinely advanced weapons: the V-2 rocket, jet-powered aircraft, guided missiles. But these programs were scattered, disorganized, and constantly disrupted by Allied air raids. So the Reich began hiding its most sensitive research in places no bomber could reach. Underground bunkers carved into mountainsides, tunnels beneath forests, secret installations in occupied territory, far from the front lines. It was in this atmosphere of desperation and secrecy that Werner Krauss received his orders. He was given command of something called Project Tiefwald, Deep Forest. The details were known to fewer than a dozen people. No written briefing was circulated. No official documentation was filed through normal military channels. Krauss was told to assemble a small team of physicists, engineers, and weapons specialists and move east into occupied Poland. He was given coordinates for a location deep inside a forest that didn't appear on any standard military map. His mission was to develop a weapons system that Berlin believed could change the course of the war. What exactly that system was wouldn't become clear for another 81 years. All that mattered in 1944 was that Werner Krauss walked into that forest, and the Wehrmacht acted as though he had never existed. April 1944. Werner Krauss sits at a desk in a requisitioned office on the outskirts of Berlin. He writes a letter to his wife, Elsa. It is short, barely half a page. No warmth, no tenderness, no mention of their son, Karl, who had just turned 7. Just 3 lines that would haunt his family for generations. If I do not return, do not search for me. What I have built must stay buried. Forgive me for everything I could not say. Elsa received the letter 4 days later. She read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in a wooden box alongside his other letters. She didn't understand it. Not then. The next morning, Krauss was seen for the last time by anyone in the official record. He boarded a covered military transport vehicle outside a logistics depot in Berlin-Lichterfelde, accompanied by a small team. 6 scientists, 4 engineers, 3 SS security officers. 2 trucks carrying sealed equipment crates followed behind. They drove east. And then, nothing. No communication. No transfer orders filed. No supply requisitions logged. No radio contact with any known command structure. Werner Krauss had effectively ceased to exist. When the war ended a year later and Allied forces began combing through captured German archives, his name appeared nowhere. Not in personnel files, not in project documentation, not in any list of casualties, prisoners, or missing officers. The Wehrmacht had erased him completely. His family was told through unofficial channels that he had been killed during a bombing raid on a facility near Dresden. But no body was recovered. No grave was marked. No personal effects were returned. Elsa kept the letter in that wooden box for the rest of her life. She never believed the official story. She knew her husband hadn't been killed by a bomb. She just didn't know what had actually happened to him. Nobody did. Not for another 81 years. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. But a different kind of war begins almost immediately. A silent one. American, British, and Soviet intelligence agencies launch a frantic race to capture German scientists, technology, and research before the other side can get to it first. The Americans call their operation Paperclip. The Soviets run their own equivalent. Thousands of documents are seized from government buildings, military headquarters, and research facilities. Filing cabinets are emptied. Entire laboratories are dismantled and shipped across borders. Hundreds of secret installations are uncovered. Underground factories where slave laborers built V-2 rockets. Hidden airfields. Chemical weapons plants disguised as agricultural depots. The scale of what the Reich had buried across occupied Europe was staggering. And yet, in all of this, not a single document mentions Project Tiefwald. Not a single captured officer references Werner Krauss or his team. Not a single facility matching the description of a forest laboratory in eastern Poland appears in any Allied or Soviet intelligence report. It's as though the project never existed. Back in Stuttgart, Elsa Krauss waited. She had written to the Red Cross 3 times before the war even ended. Each time the response was the same: no record found. She petitioned the Soviet occupation authorities who controlled the region where she believed Werner had been sent. Nothing. She contacted the Americans. Nothing. She wrote to former military colleagues whose names she found in newspapers. Most never replied. The few who did said the same thing. They hadn't seen Werner since 1943. They didn't know where he'd been reassigned. They were sorry. In 1947, Werner Krauss was officially classified as missing, presumed dead. One name among thousands on a list that no one had the resources or the will to investigate further. Elsa refused to accept it. She kept his letter in the wooden box. She kept his name on the mailbox. And she waited. Karl Krauss grew up in a house shaped by absence. His father's chair sat at the head of the dining table, but no one sat in it. His mother kept Werner's study exactly as he had left it. Books on engineering and physics lined the shelves. A drafting table stood by the window, its surface bare. Karl was 7 when his father disappeared. By the time he was a teenager, he understood that his mother's refusal to grieve wasn't denial. It was conviction. She believed Werner was alive somewhere, or if not alive, then at least not dead in the way the government claimed. She told Karl about the letter when he turned 18, the one about doors better left closed, the one that said, "Don't search for me." Karl read it and decided to do the opposite. He studied mechanical engineering at the same university his father had attended, graduated near the top of his class, took a job with a manufacturing firm in Munich. But in his spare time, he searched, quietly, methodically, obsessively. In the 1960s, he began visiting military archives in Freiburg, writing letters to veterans organizations, and tracking down former officers who had served alongside his father on the Eastern Front. Most knew nothing. A few remembered Krauss being pulled from the front in 1943. One retired colonel recalled hearing a rumor about a special weapons project somewhere in occupied Poland. But no one could confirm anything. Then, in 1974, Karl found something. In the personal diary of a deceased adjutant who had served in Berlin's logistics command, he discovered a single reference: a requisition order for construction materials to be delivered to coordinates in eastern Poland. The project name listed was Tiefwald, Deep Forest. It was the first concrete evidence that his father's final assignment had actually existed. Karl spent the next 3 decades chasing that thread. He traveled to Poland twice. He wrote to historians. He submitted Freedom of Information requests to archives in Washington, Moscow, and London. Every lead dried up. Every trail went cold. Karl Krauss died in 2003 at the age of 66. He never found his father. He never learned what Project Tiefwald was, and the forest kept its secret for another 22 years. The forests of eastern Poland don't forget. They just bury everything and keep growing. The region south of Białowieża, near the Belarusian border, is one of the most densely wooded areas in all of Europe. Ancient oaks and hornbeams tower above a floor so thick with undergrowth that visibility drops to a few yards in places. In winter, the canopy blocks the sky. In summer, the air is heavy and still. It is a landscape that swallows things. During the war, this entire region was occupied territory. The Germans built roads, supply depots, ammunition stores, and communications posts throughout these forests. Some were large enough to house hundreds of soldiers. Others were small, concealed installations designed to be invisible from the air. When the war ended and the Soviets swept through, most of these sites were either stripped for materials or simply abandoned. Then the forest took over. Concrete bunkers cracked under the pressure of roots. Metal structures rusted and collapsed. Roads that once carried military convoys were swallowed by moss and fern within a decade. By the 1960s, entire installations had vanished beneath the canopy. Villages that had been evacuated during the occupation were never resettled. Their foundations crumbled, their wells filled with debris. The forest grew over them like skin closing over a wound. Locals knew the signs. Hunters would occasionally stumble across strange things in the deep woods. A rusted helmet half buried in a stream bed, shell casings scattered across a clearing, concrete fragments jutting from the earth at odd angles, pieces of machinery so corroded they were unrecognizable. Old-timers in the surrounding villages told stories passed down from their grandparents. Stories about convoys arriving at night, about sounds coming from underground, about German soldiers patrolling stretches of forest where no roads led. But nobody investigated. Nobody dug deeper. This was Poland. The war had left scars everywhere. One more ruin in the woods was not worth the trouble. The forest had claimed it, and that was enough. April 14th, 2025. Marek Zielinski is 3 hours into what should have been an unremarkable day. He's been contracted by the Regional Forestry Commission to conduct land assessments in a stretch of woodland earmarked for potential conservation designation. His job is straightforward: soil composition analysis, tree density mapping, ground-penetrating radar scans to check for subsurface water tables and root structures. He's done this work hundreds of times. The radar unit is mounted on a small wheeled cart that he pushes slowly through the undergrowth, recording data on a tablet as he goes. Most of the readings are exactly what he expects: root networks, rock formations, the occasional pocket of clay. Then, at approximately 11:40 in the morning, the radar returns something different. A void. A large rectangular void roughly 12 feet below the surface. Marek stops. He runs the scan again. Same result. The shape is too uniform to be natural, too large to be a collapsed animal burrow or a rotted tree root. He marks the coordinates and starts clearing the area by hand, pulling away dead branches, leaf litter, and packed soil. 20 minutes, and his fingers scrape against something solid. Concrete. Smooth, reinforced, and unmistakably man-made. He keeps digging, widening the area until the outline of a hatch becomes visible. A heavy iron door set flush into a concrete frame. The locking mechanism is seized shut by decades of corrosion. Marek works at it with a pry bar for nearly 15 minutes before the seal finally breaks. The door groans open, and a rush of stale, cold air hits him in the face. Below the hatch, a set of narrow concrete stairs descends into darkness. The walls are lined with reinforced concrete. The air smells like damp stone and something faintly chemical. Marek doesn't go down. He steps back, pulls out his phone, and calls his supervisor. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, local police have arrived. By evening, a forensic archaeology team from Warsaw is en route. And the secret that this forest has kept for 81 years is about to be dragged into the light. The forensic archaeology team from Warsaw arrived on the morning of April 15th. 6 specialists, accompanied by 2 structural engineers and a military historian from the Polish Institute of National Remembrance. They brought portable lighting generators and air quality monitors. Before anyone set foot on those stairs, they needed to know the air below was breathable. The readings came back safe. Low oxygen, but not dangerous. No toxic gases. No methane. Just stale, dead air that hadn't circulated in decades. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Anna Kowalczyk, was the first to descend. What she found at the bottom of those stairs was a narrow corridor stretching roughly 40 meters into the earth. The walls were poured, reinforced concrete. The ceiling was low, barely 6 feet. Every few meters, steel support beams were bolted into the structure. German engineering. Precise, methodical, built to last. The corridor was dark, but intact. No significant collapse. No flooding. Whatever had been constructed down here had been constructed well. Rooms branched off on either side. The first was a generator room. 2 large diesel generators sat rusted and silent, their fuel lines corroded and crumbling. Cables ran from the units into the walls, feeding power to the rest of the facility. Across the corridor, a dormitory. 8 metal bunk frames, most of them collapsed under their own weight. A few personal effects scattered across the floor. A shaving kit, a pair of spectacles with one lens missing, a tin cup. The next room was a communications station. A radio set sat on a metal desk, its components gutted. Someone had deliberately destroyed it. The vacuum tubes were smashed. Wiring had been ripped out and cut. This wasn't decay. This was sabotage. Then, at the far end of the corridor, the team reached a heavy steel door. Unlike everything else down here, this door was sealed shut, bolted from the inside. Stenciled across its surface in faded black paint were words that made Dr. Kowalczyk's breath catch. Projekt Tiefwald. Zutritt nur mit Genehmigung. Access only with authorization. It took the engineers 2 hours to cut through the locking mechanism. When the door finally swung open, what lay behind it would change everything anyone thought they knew about this forgotten corner of the war. The laboratory was larger than anyone expected. A single rectangular room, roughly 15 meters long and 8 meters wide, with a ceiling reinforced by steel I-beams. The air inside was colder than the corridor. Drier, too. Whatever ventilation system had been designed for this space had done its job well enough that even after 81 years, the room had been partially preserved. Along the walls ran a series of workbenches, metal surfaces now covered in a thin film of oxidation. Instruments lay scattered across them. Calipers, micrometers, precision tools so corroded they crumbled at the slightest touch. Glass containers lined a shelf above one bench. Some had shattered their contents, long evaporated, leaving behind dark, unidentifiable residue staining the concrete beneath. Others were still sealed, intact. Whatever was inside them would later require hazardous materials protocols to handle. But it was what the team found in the center of the room that stopped them cold. Stacked neatly inside waterproof metal tubes were technical blueprints, dozens of them, rolled tightly and sealed with wax. When the first tube was carefully opened and its contents unrolled under portable lighting, the drawings were remarkably preserved. Detailed schematics of guidance systems, propulsion mechanisms far more advanced than anything known to have been developed in 1944. diagrams that bore an unsettling resemblance to directed energy weapon concepts. Technology that wouldn't enter mainstream military research for another 30 years. Against the far wall, a large chalkboard still bore faded equations, partial formulas, notations in a precise, disciplined hand. Some of the mathematics was so advanced that the military historian on the team later admitted he couldn't follow it. But it was the desk in the far corner that drew every eye in the room. Small, wooden, a chair pushed back, as though someone had just stood up and walked away. On its surface sat a leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, yellowed by time, but still legible. On the cover, 2 initials were embossed in faded gold leaf. W.K. Werner Krauss had left behind more than a laboratory. He had left behind his confession. Dr. Kowalczyk's team spent 3 days documenting the laboratory before anyone touched the journal. When a conservation specialist finally opened it under controlled lighting, the pages crackled like dried leaves. But the ink had held. The handwriting was small, precise, and unmistakably German. The journal spanned roughly 8 months. The earliest entry was dated May 3, 1944. The last was undated. The first pages read like what you'd expect from a military engineer running a classified project. Clinical, detached, progress reports on construction timelines, requests for materials, personnel rosters listing scientists by specialization, notes on equipment calibration and testing schedules. There was no emotion in these entries, no reflection, just a man doing his job with the methodical discipline of someone who had been trained to document everything and question nothing. But by August, the tone begins to shift. Krauss writes about pressure from Berlin, deadlines that are impossible to meet, SS liaison officers who arrive unannounced and terrify his research staff with inspections that feel more like interrogations. One entry from September 12th mentions a physicist named Dr. Engel, who questioned the feasibility of an accelerated timeline during a briefing. Krauss writes that Engel was removed from the facility the following morning. He never returned. No explanation was given. By October, the entries become personal. Krauss describes forced laborers being used in the construction of the facility's lower levels, Polish and Soviet prisoners transported in at night and kept in conditions he calls unspeakable. He writes about hearing sounds through the walls, about refusing to inspect the labor quarters because he couldn't bear what he would find. One entry, dated October 29, 1944, reads, "We are building the future with the bones of the innocent. I cannot stop it. I can only ensure it is never used." The final entries are different from everything that came before. The handwriting is uneven, rushed. Words are crossed out and rewritten. Sentences trail off mid-thought. Krauss writes about dismantling key components, about hiding critical research where no one would think to look, about destroying records and falsifying reports to send to Berlin. He writes about sealing the laboratory, and in the very last entry, just 3 lines scrawled at the bottom of a page with no date, he writes something that would stay with Dr. Kowalczyk long after she left that bunker. "They are coming. I have done what I can. May God forgive me for the rest." Piecing together the final days of Project T-Fold required the journal, the physical evidence, and the broader historical timeline. And when investigators laid all 3 side by side, the picture that emerged was as tragic as it was chilling. By late November 1944, Soviet forces were advancing rapidly through eastern Poland. German positions were collapsing across the region. Berlin began issuing frantic orders to evacuate or destroy classified installations before they could be captured. Krauss received his orders. Dismantle the laboratory. Transfer all research materials and prototypes to a secondary facility further west. Prepare the site for demolition. He ignored every word. The journal makes clear that by this point, Krauss had made his decision. Whatever Project Twofold had produced, he believed it was too dangerous to exist. Not too dangerous for the enemy, too dangerous for anyone. He began systematically dismantling critical components. Guidance mechanisms were disassembled and buried in separate locations. Key blueprints were sealed in waterproof tubes and hidden inside the laboratory walls. Others were burned. He falsified transfer documents for his scientific staff, giving them orders that would route them to facilities in Western Germany where they could surrender to the Americans rather than fall into Soviet hands. Most of them survived the war. None of them ever spoke publicly about what they had worked on. But the SS escorts assigned to Project Twofold were not so easily dismissed. 3 officers had been stationed at the facility since its construction. Their job was to ensure the project stayed on schedule and on mission. When Krauss refused to comply with Berlin's evacuation orders, they would have intervened. The evidence suggests they tried. In the corridor outside the dormitory, investigators found something the initial survey had missed. 3 bullet holes in the concrete wall at chest height. A steel helmet lying on the ground 15 meters from the laboratory door. A single hole punched clean through the left side. No human remains were found in the corridor, but dark staining on the concrete floor near the bullet impacts was later confirmed to be degraded biological material consistent with blood. Something happened in that corridor, a confrontation, possibly a struggle over control of the facility. The journal's final entry suggests Krauss was alone when he sealed the laboratory door from the inside. 3 lines, no date, no preamble. It is done. They will not have it. God forgive me for all of it. Whatever happened to the SS officers, their bodies were never recovered. But Werner Krauss sealed that steel door, locked himself inside, and never came out. The forest grew over the hatch. The years passed, and for 81 years, nobody knew he was still down there. It was on the second day of the full excavation that a member of the forensic team noticed something the initial survey had overlooked. A narrow doorway set into the wall of the main corridor, partially concealed behind a collapsed shelving unit. It wasn't a room so much as a recess. A small concrete chamber, no larger than a closet, roughly 2 meters deep, and barely wide enough for a person to sit with their legs extended. Inside, they found him. A single skeleton seated upright against the far wall. The posture was deliberate, legs straight, back against the concrete, head slightly tilted forward, as though he had simply fallen asleep. On the floor beside the right hand lay a Walther PPK pistol, standard issue for German officers. The magazine was missing 1 round. The team stood in silence for a long time before anyone spoke. Dr. Kowalczyk later said it was the stillness of the scene that affected her most. There was no violence in the positioning, no sign of panic or struggle. Just a man who had sat down in the dark and made his final decision alone. The personal effects confirmed what everyone already suspected: a tarnished wedding ring on the left hand. When it was carefully removed and cleaned, the engraving on the interior band read W&E 1934, Werner and Elsa. In the breast pocket of the decayed uniform jacket, investigators found a photograph, faded almost beyond recognition, but still legible under magnification. A woman standing in a garden, holding the hand of a small boy, Elsa and Karl, taken sometime in the early 1940s. Military identification tags hung from the neck. The stamping matched Wehrmacht records for General Werner Krauss, But it was the DNA that sealed it. Samples were extracted from the remains and compared against a living descendant, Krauss's granddaughter, Marta, still living in Stuttgart. The match was conclusive. Werner Krauss had never left the bunker. He had sealed the laboratory, destroyed the radio, locked the steel door from the inside, then walked into that small chamber, sat down against the wall with a photograph of his wife and son in his pocket, and ended his life on his own terms. He had been sitting there in the dark beneath the forest floor for 81 years, waiting for someone to find him, or perhaps hoping no one ever would. The news broke within days. Polish authorities issued a joint statement with the Institute of National Remembrance, confirming the discovery of an intact World War II underground research facility in eastern Poland, and the recovery of human remains positively identified as those of a German military officer. They did not release Krauss's name immediately. But it didn't matter. Within a week, the story had leaked. Journalists descended on the region. Historians scrambled to verify the claims. Military technology experts demanded access to the blueprints. And in a quiet apartment in Stuttgart, a 63-year-old woman named Marta Hoffmann received a phone call from the Polish consulate that would turn her world inside out. Marta was Werner Krauss's granddaughter, Karl's only daughter. She had grown up hearing stories about a grandfather who vanished during the war. She had watched her father spend decades chasing a ghost through archives and dead-end leads. She had inherited his research files when he died in 2003. Boxes of letters, photocopied documents, notes scrawled on hotel stationery from trips to Warsaw and Freiburg, a folder labeled Tiefwald with a question mark after it. When Polish investigators reviewed Karl's files, they were stunned. His research had been remarkably accurate. He had identified the correct region. He had found the project name. He had come closer to the truth than anyone realized. He just never found the hatch. Marta traveled to Poland in May 2025. She was shown her grandfather's journal, his identification tags, the photograph he had carried in his pocket. She held the wedding ring in her hands and wept. For the first time in 81 years, the Krauss family had answers. But those answers opened a door to a debate that would prove far more complicated than a simple family reunion. Historians were divided almost immediately. Some called Krauss a war criminal, a man who had willingly participated in a weapons program built on the backs of forced laborers, a man who had watched prisoners suffer and done nothing to stop it. Others argued that Krauss had made the only moral choice available to him. He had sabotaged his own project. He had sent his scientists to safety. He had ensured that whatever Project Tiefwald had produced would never be used by anyone. The blueprints themselves only deepened the controversy. Modern defense engineers who reviewed the schematics confirmed that the designs were extraordinarily advanced. Guidance systems that anticipated inertial navigation concepts not developed until the 1960s. Propulsion diagrams that bore striking similarities to technology that wouldn't enter military testing until the late 1970s. And the directed energy weapon concepts. Theoretical, incomplete, but recognizable to anyone familiar with modern research in the field. Werner Krauss had been building something that was decades ahead of its time, and then he had buried it. The question that no one could agree on was whether that made him a hero or a coward, a man of conscience or a man who simply couldn't face what he had done. The forest doesn't care about secrets. It doesn't care about war or guilt or the choices men make in the dark. It just grows. For 81 years, the trees above Project Tiefwald added ring after ring. Roots pushed deeper into the soil, wrapping themselves around concrete that was never meant to be found. Leaves fell and decayed forming layers of earth that buried the hatch a little more with each passing season. Rain seeped into the ground and ran along the walls of corridors where men once worked and argued and feared for their lives. The forest grew, and the world moved on, and Werner Krauss sat alone in his small concrete chamber with a photograph in his pocket and a decision he could never take back. He made a choice, not a clean one, not a heroic one, not the kind of choice that fits neatly into the stories we tell ourselves about good men and bad wars. He participated in a program built on suffering. He watched forced laborers construct the walls around him, and he did not stop it. He built weapons designed to kill on a scale that even he found terrifying. And then, at the very end, when the walls were closing in and the orders came to hand it all over, he destroyed everything he had created and sealed himself inside with it. Was that redemption? Was that cowardice? Was it the only option left to a man who had run out of choices? 81 years later, we still don't have a clean answer. And maybe that's the point. His wife Elsa waited for him until she died. She never accepted the official story. She never moved his chair from the dining table. His son Karl spent a lifetime searching through archives and dead-end leads, chasing a ghost that was sitting 12 feet beneath the forest floor in eastern Poland the entire time. He came close, heartbreakingly close. But the forest kept its secret just long enough. Karl died without answers. It took a forestry worker with a radar scanner on an unremarkable Tuesday morning to stumble onto what 2 generations of searching could not find. And that's the part of this story that haunts me most. Not the laboratory, not the blueprints, not even the skeleton in the chamber. It's the randomness of it. Marek Zielinski wasn't looking for Werner Krauss. He wasn't looking for anything. He was doing his job, pushing a cart through the undergrowth, when a screen flickered with a reading that didn't make sense. If he had walked 10 meters to the left, he would have missed it. If the Forestry Commission had assigned a different grid for that week's survey, the hatch would still be buried, and the Krauss family would still be waiting. How many other families are still waiting right now? How many other secrets are sitting beneath the forests of Europe, beneath the fields of France, the mountains of Austria, the marshlands of Belarus? World War II scattered its wreckage across an entire continent, and 80 years later, we are still finding pieces of it, still opening doors that were sealed shut by men who hoped they would never be opened, still pulling answers out of the ground that arrived decades too late for the people who needed them most. In June 2025, Polish authorities formally sealed the site. The hatch is now roped off with police tape. A temporary security fence surrounds the clearing where Marek first scraped his fingers against concrete. The forensic teams have gone. The blueprints have been transferred to a secure facility for further analysis. Werner Krauss's remains have been returned to his family in Germany. Martha Hoffmann buried her grandfather beside his wife Elsa and his son Karl in a small cemetery in Stuttgart. 3 generations united in death by a secret that took 81 years to surface. But the forest is still there. The trees are still growing. And if you stand at the edge of that clearing on a quiet morning, you can still see it. The concrete hatch, the rusted iron door propped open, and the staircase descending into the dark. Some doors once opened can never be fully closed. And some stories, no matter how deeply they are buried, will always find their way back to the surface. Stories like this, they stay with you. You lie in bed at night and your brain just keeps turning it over. What would you have done in his place? Could he have made it out? And before you know it, it's 2 a.m. and you're still wide awake. And if you're someone who deals with that regularly, lying there, mind racing, unable to shut off. I know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't stop. And the worst part? The less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes. Your mood suffers. Everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with this for years. Tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk. Nothing worked long-term. Then I found something called the 30-Day Uninterrupted Sleep Reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that actually retrains your brain to sleep through the night, 7 to 8 hours, uninterrupted. Over 30 days, it rewires your sleep system. And once you're done, you keep the results. There's a maintenance plan, so you don't slip back. Look, if you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. Check the link in the description. Seriously, try it. And I'll catch you in the next story.